So now this is my favorite part to talk about, because as we were preparing for this webinar, Lucy was like, oh, we really need a case study. And I was thinking through my clients and I'm like, oh, who should I think about? Who should I check out? And I found this person and it was like, oh my God, this is the perfect person for this case study. So meet Andre. Andre is 28. He's a project manager at a transportation company. He's been there at the organization for 2.5 years. When he came to me, he was about 1 year into this management position. And he was brought to us at MRG because his boss was feeling like, his boss saw a lot of potential in Andre, but he was feeling like, man, as a manager, he's not getting the most out of his team. His team seems a little lost. They seem disorganized. It doesn't seem like he's giving them a lot of direction. And then additionally, the boss felt like Andre kept coming to him to ask for, his advice on decisions, direction, and other people in the organization were kind of feeling that way as well. So Andre was getting this reputation as, is he really leadership material? Is he, is he gonna do really well? Is he gonna succeed in this role? But they saw his potential, and so that's why they brought him to coaching with us to see if we could do anything about it. So as part of the coaching, we gave him an LEA 360, and here were his starting scores. So what you'll see is the first one is management focus. So again, management focus is where you take charge, you're directive, you stand visibly as a leader. And you can see that his scores were pretty low on a scale of 1 to 100. His boss and his peers were about at a 35%, but his direct reports were down at a 10. Those are the people he's supposed to be directing, and they saw him very, very low. His deference to authority was extremely high. So again, he was deferring to those superior or senior to him in the organization and asking their permission. And he was also, sharing those, saying, oh, let's talk to the boss before making a decision when he was around his peers and direct reports. And then also strategic. So strategic, he was kind of in the mid-range, and he really was a pretty strategic person, thinking about, analyzing data for the organization, making plans, all of that. But as we talked a little bit more, we thought that that might be another focus area for him to work on. All right. Now, we also did the effectiveness questionnaire on him, and that's on a scale of 1 to 7. All right. And so the first thing that we looked at was perceived confidence. And what you'll see is his scores are okay, right? They look kind of average. But what you need to know about the anchored rating scale of 1 to 7 is that typically not a lot of people give others between a 1 and a 3. Right. So it's kind of the scale itself is kind of short. And so a 4, even though that means sort of average, really is kind of a lower score. So a 4 is not great. His boss saw him as a 5, peers 5.7. So he's, pretty good. He's all right. Same thing for overall effectiveness. He had the exact same scores. So direct reports, not so great, doing pretty okay for the others. And then we have future potential. Again, his direct reports saw him relatively low with a 4, but then, others do absolutely see his potential. So this is where we're starting from. So what did we do? We started to work, and our first main focus was management focus, which again is being influential, taking charge. Now, why were his scores so low was the first thing we needed to find out about. Well, come to find out, Andre had a dictatorial boss in the past who was really, just told everybody what to do, didn't listen. He really did not appreciate that experience, and he did not want his team to feel that way. So he really tried to give them a lot of space. He also was of the opinion, like, these are all grown-ups. I'm going to do my work. They can do their work. I don't need to remind them, kind of who am I? I'm going to let them, share their opinions. But what was happening is in the team meetings, 1 or 2 strong characters were kind of standing out, and they would derail the conversation. And then the rest of the people were kind of left wondering what the heck's going on. So there was not a lot of direction. So when we started to talk about it, we're like, all right, those team meetings are really important. You need to make sure that you've got a purpose for every meeting that you have with your team and a strong agenda. And if people start to derail and pull it off course, You, as the leader, need to bring it back, to that purpose, always reminding people of the purpose and bring it back to the agenda. You can consider input from your team, but then you need to make the call and you need to show them you're making the call. And you need to take responsibility for the performance of your group. You can't, it's not, you as the leader are responsible for how your team performs. So it's not just about the individuals. So you've got to, take control of it and provide constructive feedback to naysayers. So this was a big stretch for Andre. He was not really comfortable. So we had to do a lot of role playing and, coaching, and he would try something out and come back and we'd reflect on it and he would try something else. But this was the biggest stretch for him. The next thing we looked at was deference to authority. And it was like, wow, those are some really high scores, especially on a norm-based assessment, right? You're really, really in the top compared to other leaders. So, Andre was very, he was really eager to please. He was quite ambitious. He wanted to be promoted. I mean, he had just gotten a promotion, but he also, wanted to keep growing. And because of that, he was hesitant to act without asking. And he was also hesitant to push back against those senior to him in the organization, which gave the feeling that he was, he needed a lot of support and maybe wasn't leadership material. So again, it was all about preparing for the meetings. Like before you're going to meet with your senior people, make a plan. Figure out what your opinions are and figure out how you're going to present those ideas. Practice using persuasive language. And then also identify one or two things that you can do without asking, where you're going to ask forgiveness rather than permission. All right. So those were the changes that we worked on. And then finally with strategic, again, he was already utilizing strategic behaviors, thinking ahead, planning, analyzing in reference to the organization's goals. But he wasn't really thinking strategically about himself and his own career advancement. So the first thing we talked about was make sure you're sharing those strategic ideas that you have about the organization with people around you. Make sure you're sharing them with your boss, with your peers, with your direct reports. And then secondly, let's take some of that strategic thought and turn it inward a little bit and figure out how you can use that to your advantage for your own career growth. So my homework for him was to set up a weekly personal strategy summit. And what that is it's just blocking off like an hour in your week. And usually I suggest to people to do it like after a weekend. So do it on Sunday or do it early Monday morning before you get in. Don't start your emails, just block off your time and protect it. So put it in your calendar. Don't allow anyone to come in and try to grab you out of your own personal meeting. People are high in cooperation. They have a really hard time doing that. What if my team needs me? But no, you've got to block off that time and you've got to protect it. And during that personal strategy summit, I asked Andre to answer some of these questions. What important meetings are coming up for me this week or in 2 weeks, in the next 2 weeks? How can I prepare for them? And when will I prepare for them? So when will I block off time on my calendar this week to make sure I'm ready for that meeting with the boss? I'm ready for that team meeting. What expertise do I need to bring to these meetings? And how and when will I get it? Do I have an opportunity to lead in these meetings? Well, obviously, when he's leading the team meeting, he does. But maybe there's a peer group meeting where he could say, yeah, I got this, I'll take it. Or, with his the senior team, he could also stand up and show his leadership abilities. Getting really clear and intentional on what ideas am I pushing for and how can I make them convincing? And then what objections might I encounter and how can I push back? So these are just some of the questions that you can ask yourself, or a leader or a client can ask themselves during a personal strategy summit. And these are some of the ones that we used with Andre, right? And in the end, what we were saying was to look at each meeting as an opportunity to demonstrate both your competence and your confidence, right? So we worked along, I had him for 6 or 9 months. I can't remember exactly how long. He was seeing some progress. His boss was seeing some progress. that was great. And I was okay, take care, bye-bye, love you, off you go, when our engagement was done. So that was that. Until 2 years later, independently, he came back to me. He was part of a leadership development program that happened to use the LEA 360. So we got to give it to him again 2 years later, and I got to coach him again, which was so exciting. And what was interesting is his boss, his peers, his direct reports were all the exact same people, except for one direct report had changed. That was it. So this was a true time 1, time 2 comparison. So when he retook the LEA 360 2 years later, his management focus scores went up an average of 113%. Now, remember, that was the big one we were working on. So we were psyched about that. I mean, from his boss's perspective, it went up from 35 to a 75. From his direct reports perspective, it went up from a 10 to a 45. So big, big, big shift for him in that behavior. We looked at his deference to authority. That went down just a little bit, average of 6%. However, it was still a nice shift. People were starting to notice it. And then strategic went up an average of 19%. So another, pretty big shift. I think mostly because he was sharing those strategic ideas that he had, whereas before he had been keeping them to himself. So also we redid the effectiveness questionnaire. His perceived confidence jumped up an average of 20%, which was exciting, but more importantly, his overall effectiveness also jumped up 20%, and his future potential jumped up 20%. Now, I don't know if you can see it here, but the jump for his boss went from a 5, which is kind of like, yeah, you're doing okay, to a 7. The 7 is the highest score you can give someone, right? And it says exceptional. The descriptor is like exceptional, one of the best I've seen. So to have your boss's opinion jump up 2 points, that's a big deal. So we were really excited when we saw those results. And so in addition to noteworthy movements in his behavior scores, his effectiveness ratings increased across the board, and he is being considered for a promotion.